on adolescents and pediatrics. And I'm just going by the PowerPoint book. I just like to read from some notes. Most of this with the adolescents, pediatrics in Chapter 11 in your textbook. And there's also, there's some good parts in ATI. I'll try to point those out. But we'll move through that quick. And then we'll do a high level of personality disorders, going over them. And then, but this will finish up your content for the exam tomorrow. Okay? Is everybody good? Okay. So if you look on your syllabus, like we said yesterday, there's several disorders you want to make sure you're going over in your textbook for this content. It's autism on page 192 in your textbook, ADHD, which we talked about a good bit yesterday, separation anxiety, mood disorders, this is all in your syllabus, conduct disorder, and adjustment disorder. Page 192. Your medications for this chapter, the ones that we've already gone over, are your antidepressants, and mainly it's 3 of the categories: SSRIs, SNRIs, which are keeping norepinephrine, more circulating norepinephrine, as opposed to serotonin, and tricyclics. Okay, so go back over the notes that you studied for those 3 groups of antidepressants. Make sure you know the side effects, any pertinent teaching that you need to let the client know, especially with a new prescription. Then the new class with children and adolescents are the stimulants. And those are mainly the ones that you use for what? ADHD. These are your Ritalins. And like we said yesterday, the stimulants work. Is it
Elliot.
Oh, that's right. I like that. Hey, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. Come on. I knew. When somebody tells me there's a problem, I'll let y'all come in. As far as coming in, attendance, let me just go ahead and say, if I've talked to y'all and I know you're coming in the classroom, you're running late, the weather was crappy or something, I'm going to open the door and let you come on in if I've talked to you and touched base with you. But keep in mind, when you get into adult health too, and you have different people teaching your different content every day, when that door is shut, y'all, that door is shut and you can't come in. And if you didn't contact me and have something unusual going on, I'm not going to open that door and let you come in late. So we've done it a couple times, but I always have y'all at the beginning of the semester. And there's just usually, I got to run to the administrative office and give something or do something, so I'll let you come on in, but I don't want to set you up for failure further in the semester, okay? So everybody's good, we're kind of in a routine, and make sure that you are in this room when the time starts. Because when they shut the door, that's when class starts, okay? So, And I'm also teaching y'all at the beginning of the semester when everybody's in the building. So getting in the bathroom is a little bit bigger challenge. But when level 4 is gone and level 1's at clinical and level 2's at clinical and you're here doing class time, which is kind of how it works at the end of the semester, and they give you a break, make sure you're back in here before that break time's over because they're going to shut the door. Okay, so the unusual stuff I deal with at the beginning of the semester is gone away after the first few weeks, and I don't want y'all to miss class time because you're late. Okay? Somebody raise their hand.
The medications, do we need to know the teaching for each individual or just the group, like SSRIs and SNRIs?
You need to know the name. You need to know some of the names, especially the more prominent meds, so that you can recognize what class it's in. Most of them, the significant teaching belongs to the class. But there are some, unique things to some of the meds. We usually hit on those in class.
That was quick.
Um,
Emma just checked the door.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and boy, I'm glad I liked it. Let me see. So, let me get back to where we were. All right, so we were going over the meds. We were talking about the stimulants. What we talked about yesterday was with stimulants for ADHD, it works paradoxically. You stimulate someone to help someone who is stimulated calm down, okay? But it has a paradoxical effect.
So like the Adderall and stuff that they give to kids, and their moms take it to give them make them hyper.
Yeah.
It does the opposite to the kid. It does actually.
It helps them calm down.
Okay.
Mhm. And so your side effects and the teaching you do for these stimulants, if you put a child on a Ritalin, say, for ADHD, some of the things you're going to be watching for is weight loss. That's one of the things most providers are going to have you go in periodically and check their weight because it's a stimulant. They may be losing weight, especially a child. You need to keep them on the normal growth and development and that they're gaining weight and all of that. So it's a whole different thing than what we've talked about so far. You may also have a child that has, say, like a mood disorder like bipolar, and they also have ADHD. Well, if that child comes in the hospital and they're in a manic phase, remember how we talked about mania yesterday with bipolar, and they are high-strung, really going 100 miles an hour, that's not the time to put them on an amphetamine mixed drug for ADHD when they're in the middle of mania. Okay, so we're kind of moving through these classes of drugs, and I think y'all are kind of grasping what each class does. And as we throw a new one in the mix, we need to remember a few key things, and that is one of them. Because most oftentimes than not, someone with ADHD or ADD, the child, they may have some other mood disorder going on. So you want to make sure before you put this stimulant in that you're not doing it with the child that's in a manic phase. You need to get that under control, then put in the stimulant. And it's just like we've talked about several other times with the mental health issues. So much of it is just managing these meds. How much of this works with that, and is this dose work? And so those are some of your key points. If you look in your book on page 184, it talks about assessment of the pediatric client, and also box 11.1. 11.1 talks about characteristics of a mentally healthy child and adolescent. And if you kind of go over these characteristics of a healthy child, healthy adolescent, it can kind of help you understand when we talk about when they have something going on that's not optimal. They need trust. They have to correctly interpret reality, just like an adult. But you think about it with the child, it may be a little bit more of a challenge, but they have to correctly assess what they're seeing with reality. They have to behave in a way that is developmentally appropriate and do not violate social norms. So with conduct disorders and behavior disorders, when we talk about the role of the nurse managing the milieu or teaching skill sets, if they have behavior that is inappropriate, that's where the nurse is going to have to intervene specifically so that you can teach them how to be appropriate in social settings, and we'll go over that a little bit more. They have a positive and realistic self-concept and developing an identity that's healthy about themselves. They adapt and cope to anxiety and stress that is appropriate for their age. They can learn and master developmental skills in new situations, and they can express themselves, and they can develop and maintain relationships. So that's a picture of a healthy child and adolescent, and when you're studying these disorders, there are variations in And on page 186, it goes over therapy types for children and adolescents. And we talked about play therapy yesterday. I wanted just to make sure that you saw the different types of therapy here on page 186. Family therapy is almost always going to be a component of mental health therapy for children. You just can't take care of the child in a vacuum. And your goal is to help that family get stronger, come together in the best interest of the child, and help them deal with whatever is going on. Group therapy, we spoke about that, and that it's still important to maintain the group, and the dynamics of the group have to be healthy. So again, if you have a child that's disruptive and you can't keep them to where they're not acting out in the group, then they would need to be separated from the group. And if you look on page 187, it talks more about disruptive behavior.
Would you do them like you do the adults and just take them out and go to their room or take them for a walk or something?
Yeah, and separate them. Let's take you back to your room, or ask the mother to step out if you're at a, out in the community. They can just step out. Some of the other ways to manage behavior with children are contracts. We touched on that yesterday. You can write a contract with a client of what type of behavior is acceptable and what's not. You can remind them of their contract and the expectations. You have to maintain your limits, though. You set your limit. This behavior is okay. This behavior is not okay. And the whole unit or the whole group of people that are in charge have to stick together on those limits. You know how that goes. I tell you can't do it, and then somebody comes behind and tells you can, and the whole thing's gone. So if you're inpatient, then the whole group of RNs, therapists, everybody has to agree that these are the limits of what behavior is okay and what's not. The other big issue with children, and we hit on this yesterday in behavior, was if it's some sort of unsafe behavior, banging their head on the wall, running, jumping, something where they could get hurt, you have to stop that behavior immediately. You can't just ignore it and say, I'm not paying attention to you. If it's somewhere where they can hurt themselves, you have to stop it. Because that is a problem with a lot of these disorders is injuries. Because they have poor impulse control, and that's where you're apt to hurt yourself. A little more about play therapy. You can, they use play therapy in a lot of settings. Like I say, an abuse case, a court case, and they're trying to ask a child, find out what happened in an abuse case, which is really traumatic. They have forensic interviewers that just specially are trained in how to interview. And they may use dolls or something to play and act out things that they can't verbally say. But through playing, the dolls, well, this happens. And if a child can't verbally communicate well, developmentally they have verbal issues, or they may have something with autism that affects their ability to communicate, play therapy is excellent, working them through weeks of watching them play and what comes out from that therapy. So it's definitely unique and different from the adult type therapy that we talked about. Now, what we didn't talk about yesterday was autism. And autism is on a spectrum, which means it can be mild to severe. It's usually noticed in the first 3 years of life. More common in boys. It's very complex, and there are some genetics involved, definitely, with how come some people end up with autism. It mainly affects social interaction and communication. Neurologically, those are the two areas that autism has the most impact on.
Social interaction and
Communication,
what? Okay, so
dating, no, could impact. Now, the thing with autism, when you're teaching families, this is kind of like with Alzheimer's, this is not going to go away. But if you intervene early, you can definitely impact how severely it impacts the child's life. So you want to get in there with therapy, find out what's going on as quick as you can. Without intense intervention, you could end up, they could just end up where they're never able to live alone. Whereas sometimes with intervention, you can have a much more productive life. So, but again, on the spectrum, in general though, the quicker you intervene, the better your outcomes are. And so assessment of a 3-year-old is going to be hard, especially you may not have a baseline, right? So you're dependent on what the family tells you how the child used to behave. And a lot of times videos are real helpful, and especially used to work with a pediatric neurologist, and his main thing he wanted was if the child was having seizures or something, was to tell the parents to video it. Because they never do it in the office, So baby books, photo albums, videos, things like that can help you understand how the child was behaving and compare it to what you're seeing now, and the provider as well. And you want a really thorough interview from the family. When you're interviewing the family with an autistic child, you're not going to be suspicious of people, but you need to understand that these children are more at risk for abuse. So you just keep your eyes open for signs of abuse. Now, y'all went over that in level 2, pediatrics. Bruises that are healing at different stages, unusual bones, long bone breaks, things like that. Just not, again, you're not going to be suspicious of the parents or anything, but you do need to be assessing for that. One of your big interventions with an autistic client is to make sure you're putting them in touch with as many social services in the community as you can. This is a strain on a family, so putting them in touch with whatever social services are available in the community. As far as medications, some anti-anxiety medications help with autism to calm some violent behavior, because they can have violent outbreaks. So anti-anxiety meds, anxiolytics can help with that. Now, recap from yesterday on ADHD. The key behavior there is impulsive behavior. That's where the safety issue came in. It has to be diagnosed before the age of 12. And the behavior that you're seeing, that you get the diagnosis for the ADHD, has to occur in at least 2 settings, like home and school. That's just so you know, if it was just happening at school and then they go home and everything's fine, there's something going on with them at school. If it's just happening at home and then they go to school and they're communicating okay and their behavior is okay, then you need to focus on what's going on at home. Okay, so 2 settings at least. Usually it's linked with low self-esteem. They usually have trouble maybe being bullied. It affects their grades. And it's, again, more common in boys. You also want to assess them for also having depression and anxiety issues, because they're coexist oftentimes. Now, the other disorders like defiant, I'm sorry. When you get into the more disruptive behavior with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorders, I'm trying to think, and just generalized conduct disorders where you have a lot more mean-spirited behavior. It's actually just a faulty personality problem, and we'll get into personality disorders more today. And it's a problem with the child, with what they want and what morally they should do. Remember when we talked about Freud and we talked about the ego and the superego? It's a problem with moving through from being a toddler type thinking where you're just I want, into morally I really can't go over there and slap you and take your stuff. And that's kind of, so with a real conduct disorder. And so you can be dealing with a lot of violence. You can be dealing with children with very disruptive personalities. This is where you get into having to use, like, debating whether you put them in restraints, debating whether you put them in seclusion. Our friend's a principal at a school, and they're all trained in physical restraints, and I don't know how many times she's been hit. So with this type of personality, you see a lot of blaming. It's not my fault. I wouldn't have done that if they hadn't done that to me. So you're sitting in group therapy and somebody looks at them wrong, and then you get an outburst. So limit setting in this situation is key. Protecting the safety of them and of others. And you're working on trying to teach them better coping skills, not responding to the impulsivity.
Do you see that just at home or in school as well?
You need
It's
both.
gonna be everywhere.
Now with meds for conduct disorders, you may see them on mood stabilizers. And you may see them on some blood pressure medications. You see that in your syllabus, like clonidine. Adrenalytics has a calming effect sometimes, so you may see them. That's a different med, so you may see that, and that kind of helps with the rage and the outbursts. And in an extreme case, you may see them on an antipsychotic. And like we mentioned earlier, with a lot of these classes of meds, and especially those behavioral meds, the stimulant meds, amphetamine types, Ritalins, Adderalls, risk for abuse with the client and risk for abuse for people that are around them given the meds. Those are the ones they crush up and snort. Mom takes it.
Yeah.
Clean house. And a big issue with it a lot is also insomnia. You want to make sure you take the stimulants
In the morning.
around before like 4 p.m. or they're going to be up all night. It just common sense side effects with those meds.
So you want to take it before 4?
Mhm. If you look on page 194 in your textbook, box 1311 is a great box about managing disruptive behavior. Page 194, box 1311. It goes over the behavioral contracts, counseling them on their behavior. And there's even something about planned ignoring, and that's where the whole unit decides if they're not going to hurt themselves and it's just some type of behavior that we want them to stop. As a group, we're going to ignore it and hope that the lack of a response will get them to not, do that. Redirection and limit setting. Now, adjustment disorder in your syllabus. It's just like a milder form of PTSD. And with children, it's going to cause problems with them in school, of course. It is an anxiety that is related to a specific stressor. And it's on page 315 in your book. Separation anxiety is on page 284. Bless you. Now, normal developmental separation anxiety peaks around 18 months old. They have a child when they're around 18 months old. Their separation anxiety kind of peaks at that point. They don't want to be away from their mom. Yeah, and you're peeling them off of you, and you feel yeah. Well, when we're talking about separation anxiety, it's when you have that type of anxiety, but it's inappropriate for their age. You know,
Once they've gotten past that
they should
point.
have gotten past that, and peaks. It's abnormal time. You need to find out what the stressor is, what's going on. We don't. So review that on page 284. Also on page 171 in ATI, it goes over conduct disorder. We talked about conduct disorders. There's a nice summary on page 171. Conduct disorders are basically bullies a lot of times, violent, and they don't have any remorse. Conduct disorders are lacking in the remorse for hurting you or someone else. And in your interventions, we go back to what we covered in Unit 1 when we talked about privacy and a duty to warn. You know, if you've got an adolescent, conduct disorder, very violent, and they're telling you things, of course you're assessing them, you're getting information from them. You try to manage their behavior as best you can, behavioral contracts, setting limits, rewarding good behavior. But if this violent group goes over the line and tells you they're like going to go back to school and kill those people that picked on me, that's where the duty to warn steps in, you know, and you would have to protect the safety of the other people. But it's just other behavioral type things they have going on. A lot of times a contract works well with them, rewarding good behavior, but you're just trying to work on making them socially acceptable and role modeling.
This might be stupid, but when you say duty to warn, like, is it our job to call the school and say, hey, they want to kill these two kids?
You would go up your, and it's a good question, you would go up, you would go to your charge nurse and let them know, and then there'll be a process wherever you're at, and it depends on what it is. And remember, we're mandatory, it kind of goes back to mandatory reporting like for child abuse. As a staff RN, you're not just going to pick up the phone and call the sheriff's department. Hey, you go to the charge nurse. The charge nurse has a process where you call somebody. Your facility, wherever it is, has a process for how you handle information like that. It may be you go through your risk manager. It may be you go through whomever. But somebody has to get the information out to the proper authorities.
Are these the people that turn into psychopaths as they get older?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. Very difficult to deal with those type of people. So I think, good bit of information there for adolescents and children, but you've got your main points. A lot of the stuff is overlapping. Now we'll talk about personality disorders.